Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. My name is Siffco. We're going to be talking about Baldur's Gate 3. So here's a review, deep thoughts, let's get into it. Firstly, we got to start off with early access. If you ever played DayZ, right when it first came out, which was like December or something, and I don't remember what year anymore, but it was buggy and it stayed in that state. Not a bugginess, but whatever build it had, it just seemed like the zombies, for example, did not get any better for years. And there was a lot of other games like that. Came to the point where my friend and I were just like, you know what? We got burned. Then Baldur's Gate 3 decided to go in early access. I just was very pessimistic. However, the reputation they built with Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2 gave me hope that it would be a better experience in early access. Mostly because in those two games, they finished it, they released a definitive edition, it always got better, and they never really charged for DLC or anything extra like that. It was full price, I think it was like $50 when it came out, and I was like, that's pretty steep for like early access. The character customization was deep and already just above average that you would get on a RPG. That in itself made it worth it for me. I was like, wow, okay. It was all about waiting and seeing what they would do. They kept the experience engaging. There was Panels from Hells, which was basically a fun cosplay or whatever that the developers and company would do themselves, and they would literally answer questions, tell you what's next in the patch.
That we're announcing today that contains many things, but which I'm not allowed to name, and for which we have no other name than the very big thing that contains many other things. Now, before we get
that your saves aren't going to be crossing over, or you aren't able to continue your save, but there would be a new class. And it was literally the best early access experience I've ever had. Just imagine, what if Starfield did the same? What if we could play 5 to 10 hours of the game at full price and listen to our feedback? What if Dragon Age did that? It's been 10 years. It's an interesting thought, and nothing's perfect, but I think it's one of the reasons gamers are calling Baldur's Gate 3 a new standard for RPGs, because that's what we've wanted. Now that's kind of what we expect. Now we can have a game to point to for these kind of games in the future. Character customization. The character customization is deep, you've already seen it. Although you can't do everything with your face, like nose and eye shape, you can do a lot with hair, beards, and there's even height that you can change with, which is something I thought should be in every RPG. There are many races, many backgrounds to choose, and they actually impact your playthrough. It seems like there's a new line of dialogue for every background you pick. That in itself is setting the bar high. Cyberpunk had this in Life Paths, but there wasn't nearly as much dialogue, and of course quality is better than quantity, but BG3 has both, and I don't say that lightly. Graphics. I have to mention this, the graphics look great, especially in 4K, especially the character models, and I usually turn off depth of field in games, but in this game I actually liked it, and I would have used it if it didn't take up frames. Spells and aura animations have brilliance to them that make them feel real fun and to see, like fireworks. They're so fun to use that you might go around your room shouting Lagrama or Ignis. They're just so fun. Are the graphics like Cyberpunk, you know? Are they insane RTX? DLSS? No, but I still think they look great. The lip sync was fantastic all throughout the game. It was amazing. I've tested it. I was like, no way this minor little dwarf or whatever is gonna have the same good lip sync as Shadowheart, and Lord behold, it did. And so it just made it more immersive. You could just see the care, and I was just like, wow. I just was blown away. Story had twists and turns with tough decisions to be made. At first, it's a race to heal from the worm in your brain that will change you into Mind Flare, which destroys your very soul. To finding out there's more to that, where enemies become allies, and where some allies are willing to sacrifice themselves for the greater good. So it becomes challenging to try and keep everyone in your whole party alive while staying hopeful in a dire situation. Companions. At this point, you can expect each companion to have a mission or conflict they can have to resolve. I went with Gale, Shadowheart, and Lae'zel, but I did do everyone's personal mission. Lae'zel was one of the most interesting to me. She had to question everything about herself and her culture, all the while are witnessing her become somebody special in this universe, especially to her people and their way of life. Romance. Honestly, best romance since Mass Effect Trilogy or even Knights of the Old Republic 1. I'll put Cassandra from Dragon Age Inquisition there as a notable mention. I would put Pan Am from Cyberpunk in there, but the romance was barely there. I mean, talk about like 3 dialogues for the rest of the game after you become a couple. That's pretty low standard. For example, you had so many dialogue options with Shadowheart after you became a couple. Even some related to the mission you just did. Even the dialogue of remembering when you first met her about her favorite flower and later finding it and giving it to her. And she's like, wow, you remembered. It makes the whole thing more real and you feel more connected. With Pan Am, you only had 3 lines after you become a couple. She never comes along with you on a mission or anything extra. With Baldur's Gate 3, you get so much more connection, it makes sense. It's what we wanted. Didn't expect this much, but I respect Larian for doing that. They added just so much dialogue. After every little mission, whether it was big, it just seemed that there was something new. There was even something new when you initiate a conversation. Something just amazing and made it more immersive and believable. Battles. I love turn-based games. Since this was my first D&D, I kind of had to get used to some of the mechanics and classes and spells and all these things. But after some time, I got used to it. Paladins are cracked. Put them up close and smite them to join their maker. Enemies surrounding your wizard? Misty step out of there. There's just so many options and I enjoy playing it. Next is religion. I go to church myself pretty regularly, and so I thought maybe give you some insight on religion. Maybe there's a whole religion thing in this universe, in this game, and I love the fact that you can just pray. There's a few statues when you get to Baldur's Gate that you can roll for and you can pray, and we're not getting deep, and of course these are like fake religions, but I thought that was a nice layer to have, is you have this game and character that is believing in something and kneeling down to pray, and there was more weight to this thing that's in this game. Like, is it believable? Do we care? But there's conflict between religions, even with your character and with Shadowheart or with whoever. And I just thought that was a nice touch. Cyberpunk had that. Cyberpunk was more, Jesus. You could believe in Jesus or believe in God or not. They had that in the game too. And so I appreciate that games are going this route. I just found that interesting. Lastly, music. I'm a musician, and the music in the game is well done, from the simple plucking of the string as you move around the grove in the early game to a Broadway ballad against Raphael in hell. The battle against Raphael was one of the most memorable because it had this interesting Broadway song of just like hell, blah 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 blah. And it was great. I really enjoyed that fight. And if you haven't listened to that song or gotten to that point, just get there, do the battle, and hear the song. It was just wonderful. So now we've gotten to the part of like what could be better with Baldur's Gate 3. Number 1, performance. I had no major issues in 4K Ultra with a 3080 and Ryzen 9 CPU until you're first sitting in Act 2 and especially Act 3. I went from like 70 to 100 FPS, and by Act 3 I had like 30, and it was kind of like struggling to be at 30. It wasn't really consistent, and I get it, and I expected that because the city is big. Every area they have is big, but it was annoying for things not to go as smoothly, especially with reviews giving it high marks. But the one good thing is Larian will work on it. It will be better. But yeah, it's a little off-putting for reviews to be so high. Epilogue. For how much depth the game has, the one thing that felt rushed or cut short was the end. I expected a party or a slower paced resolution with gathering with your companions and other minor characters. Some made sense. Some would die or had other urgent things to do, but as sweet some of these moments were, it all took about 5 minutes right after you were done with the major battle. And again, since my romance was bugged, I didn't even get an ending scene. So it felt way less conclusive. And at the time, interviews were saying that they had no plans for DLC or expansions, or even more content to continue these stories. It would have been better to have a proper dialogue, because it seems like these kind of games don't come out often. So to have an epilogue that short, it just didn't make any sense to me. It seemed very short, and it seemed like it could have been better and would have made things more conclusive, because players are going to want DLC expansions to continue that. And frankly, devs probably don't want to mess with all those branches, which is why Cyberpunk is doing an early DLC expansion in the game instead of later in the game, because there's just so many decisions. If they would have spent a little more time with the epilogue, players would be like, you know what? I'm good. That's it. It was a great run. I'm going to start another playthrough, get another ending, romance someone else, see what happens to my other companions. And that's what it's about. Bugs. No game's perfect, and this game isn't riddled with bugs, but there were a few that made me scratch my head as to how they got through. 3 stand out to me. 2 endgame armors are clipping/glitching. These are some of the best armors for my characters, and I had them look like this in every scene putting them on. I didn't want to take them off because of how good the stats were, but they became an eyesore after a while. And if I hold off till it's fixed, it becomes harder to avoid spoilers as the game is out. The other was actually a really big deal, one that I think should have been covered by bigger outlets than myself. Basically, at the end of the game, you're supposed to have a scene if you romance Shadowheart, but I didn't. Long story short, it was bugged at the time. I'll link the video to see for yourself. And believe me, I'm one understanding chill dude. But those 3 I think required a patch right away, especially the third one, because a romance thing is a big deal. But at the time of making this video, it got fixed. It got fixed right after I posted about it. I definitely don't think it was because of me, but let's have my ego have it. Although companions are the highlight, they do stand around a lot. There's a time when my character's in pain and my romance says nothing, or does nothing, or the other companions do nothing. I get it's part of the story and it has to happen, but what if she charges and gets knocked out? Or she even runs to comfort me, or maybe it's just too scared and apologizes later. But instead they stand around and just see you, the enemy or this other character in the scene is just hurting you. But after doing another playthrough of Baldur's Gate 3, in Act 1, it's not as apparent, but Acts 2 and 3, they definitely are standing around a lot. It was a long list, a fun one to dive into though. It's a great game and it does raise the standards in certain areas for sure. Some may say they sacrificed fidelity and used AAA money for AA content, but doesn't Nintendo do the same? What if you could play Zelda in 4K? What if it had this much depth? Time will only tell, and our money will always talk the hardest. With that said, this is a must-have, and at full price even, especially if you enjoy RPGs. It has so much replayability, good graphics, fun battles, tough decisions, and the most reward for choosing your own journey. Baldur's Gate 3 is for me.
Beyond the campsite, the city waits in uneasy silence, one sleep away.